And you are welcome along out of the hibernation phase of the Huddle Breakdown. James here with my good friend Alan Morrison from Celtic by Numbers after what about a 2 week hiatus here. Going to catch up on some of the recent performances, particularly look back on the Dundee game and maybe look ahead to the weekend a little bit here coming up. But how you getting on, Alan?
Very well, very well. So, I don't know what the last sighting of Enda was. The last I heard, he was caddying for Dermot Desmond and Liam Scales on a golf course. That's the last I knew.
Yeah, he's living the high life now. He's this big shot job he's got, and just for our both our loyal listeners and viewers, unlike the SFA's report, we want to have some transparency here on a review of why we've been absent. And we changed platforms some months back to resolve some of the technological challenges that we had in getting a clearer signal, and that limited us from doing some live shows that we had done periodically on YouTube. And the second part of that is I'm not trained up to do the post production. So even when it's just Alan and I, Enda will do the post production with this new platform that we're using. And if he was out of town, he wasn't available to do that last week. So even when Alan and I were available to do a recording, he wasn't around to to produce it. So hopefully I'll get coached up for the new season. That'll be a project for the summer. Hopefully I can drag Enda in off the golf course and off the yacht in the Mediterranean that he apparently is also spending some time on with models and other such people. But uh, but yeah, so we're back, and let's just dive right in on the Dundee game. Some of the hot topics coming out of that. Obviously, we've got a title race that's kind of flipped a little bit since we last recorded. At least the relative odds that are permeating with the 3 point gap now and goal difference gap that's opened up a little bit in Celtic's favor. So yeah, let's real quick. What are your high level takeaways, Alan, from the that glorious barn burner of Dundee? I mean, what a letdown after that Aberdeen game, obviously, but it's impossible to maintain that level of excitement, even if it was hair raising at times.
Yeah, listen, it was another game, a bit like the St Mirren game a few weeks ago, which was actually massively impacted by the weather, and this has been a bit of a recent theme. There were high winds, and Celtic played with the wind in that first half and pretty much penned Dundee in from the most part. And then the second half had to face it was a 15-minute spell, really, 15-minute spell where they just couldn't get hold of the ball, and they were basically pinned in with a barrage of throw-ins and corners and free kicks and so forth. And which obviously the wind was aiding. And it's bizarre to talk about wind in the context of professional football because I mean I'm used to heavily involved in grassroots football, and wind is the thing that absolutely ruins a game, especially if your kids play in a team that's very kind of get the ball on the ground, possession based. It can completely decimate trying to play football in that way. And you're playing the side of a hill, just outside Barnsley, what have you. It's kind of tricky, But in professional football, you're not really used to seeing wind have a massive impact, but it clearly did in that St Mirren game, and it did to slightly lesser extent, I think, in the Dundee game. And that, so I'm not making excuses for Celtic, especially the second half performance, which we can touch on maybe why it kind of disintegrated a little bit. Um, but I think we do have to, for me, we have to acknowledge the fact that the elements played their part. And anything which disrupted, it was a fiery pitch. We know that we've had issues on the pitch. To echo Brendan Rodgers' comment, which I thought was brilliant before the game, it looked like it needed watering. Actually, it looked like it needed a bit of work on it. It was a bit bumpy and a bit dry and a bit fiery, really. So listen, this is Scottish football, and you need to be used to that. Um, and it's no excuse, but Celtic are a possession-based team that want to pass the ball around quickly, and all of those elements, all of those physical, environmental factors, how generally will hinder to some extent. Again, I'm not making excuses poor performances or bad tactics or anything like that. I'm just trying to state, hopefully what is factually the environment that they operate in. It's then up to the team to really adapt to that. And I actually thought in the first half they did. I mean, people tend to remember the bad bits. I think, especially because the second half was a bit fraught. But actually, the level of control in the first half I thought was pretty decent. To be fair with you, so overall, again, we go back to our stated position on the pod from about 2 months ago, which is just effing win. Let's not worry too much about the performance, and we kind of,
Yeah.
I know we will get into the performance. That's what we do, but ultimately, you kind of file it under that category. I think.
Yeah, it was, one of the things I try to bring to the table is a focus on the opposition as well. And
Hmm. Oh, oh yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
well, no, I was just going to say because I think it's rather than just repeat what you said because I agree with everything you just said. I'll delve into that a little bit.
Hmm,
I thought it
hmm.
was interesting that they lined up kind of in a 4-2-3-1. They didn't really play to bunker. We always
No.
talk about sides that are you know willing to have a go against us on a relative basis versus setting up in a 5-4-1 or some kind of hybrid 3-5-2, that kind of thing. But yeah, as far as a game against Dundee goes, I mean, it was pretty normal, I guess, meaning that not abnormal in the sense that they weren't looking to just hit on the counter and just bunkering. So I thought that they're so that's kind of I was great on a curve, meaning that given that fact, I agree with you, we were under control, but I was actually surprised that we didn't create more when we had the wind in particular. But
Yeah.
to your point's a good you know a good one relative to the pitch conditions and some of the challenges with the wind, um, which obviously were variables we didn't know necessarily going into the
Well,
game.
even
I mean,
even the
we knew the
goal.
pitch was going to be a mess, but
Yeah, even
sorry,
at
go ahead.
first goal, the ball fires up off of Kyogo. I mean, he's not laying it off to Forrest. He just miscontrolled it because the ball, comes firing
Yep,
in at him, and the pitch is bobbly. It fires up off his foot, and Forrest's reaction is absolutely incredible. It's an absolutely brilliant volley, but that came really was lucky. Essentially, that was where
yep.
the conditions actually played to Celtic's benefit. Really.
Well, that's a nuance, but when you're playing with material wind, I mean, even something as relatively innocuous as like that pass to Kyogo. I mean, it's just those reaction times and touch are so fine tuned that just a little bit of you know, over that distance with the extra wind can set that timing off. And you have a bobbly pitch. I mean, it really is a matter of moments and fractions of a second and timing that can really impact that. Um, so, other than those, and any other, before we get into some individual players, any other kind of high level factors in the game that were surprising to you relative to tactics? I'll name one again, just from a this is a
Mm.
I hate now, since I've kind of delved into the analytics stuff over the last few years. I swear to people that that wasn't always the case when I would watch Celtic games. And when I see something, even when the opposition's doing something that's just absurdly like ridiculous, I get distracted. And the one that distracted me in this game was how in the hell is Dundee not doing long throw-ins the entire game? Their first long throw, like they had a lot of throw-ins.
Mm.
I checked.
Mm.
It was some. They had more. I think they had more throw-ins than we did in the game, which again is a little bit unusual. Um, and I think corners were equal, like maybe 8-8, something like that. And the fact that I think it was the 80, I made a mental
32.
note.
So they had 32 throw-ins. Let's be accurate about this. They had 32
Yeah,
throw-ins, and we had 24. There you go.
yeah, yeah. So again, not typical. But now again, with the wind, it was kind of chaotic, and
Yeah,
that so
corners
that
was
that's
eight each. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So I made a mental note of it. It was the 85th minute before they did a long throw, and then almost everything from then on was a long throw, and they kind of created some havoc. And you know, um, given the
Yeah, but I think
relative strengths
it was
and
the
weaknesses
lad
of the two
Donnelly.
teams.
Yeah, it was the lad Donnelly they brought on though. He was a substitute, so I mean,
No,
he
I
had
I
he had an absolutely enormous. I mean, he was almost throwing it. past the goalkeeper.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he was really good at it. But again, to me, like, have one of your guys with long arms. Just, I mean, these are adult professional footballers. Somebody can
Mm,
throw the ball freaking 25 yards to get it into the box.
mm,
Is kind of my point.
mm,
So that was that. Just I was like, because immediately, I mean, how many times did they have a throw in the first 84 minutes? I mean, it was not a small number. Like they had, let's say four or
mm,
five. I'm just going off memory, where they
mm.
were in a position to do a long throw into our box, and they just took it short and immediately lose possession. Like it would never turn into anything, as it is apt not to do. Of teams of their level playing us. I just one of those glaring issues. I'm just like, when you see an opposition manager that doesn't do certain things, it's just so obvious. But anyway, I apologize for the digression. So, any other tactical aspects from a high level that you found of interest?
Well, I mean, they were very clear that they had a plan, and that plan seemed to be in the first half, basically let Carter Vickers and Scales have the ball, and then man mark everybody else. And actually, Carter Vickers and Scales brought the ball forward quite a few times. I think they, just looking very quickly, had something like between them 13 what I would call progressive runs, or a progressive run being you carry the ball at your feet at least 10 yards inside the opposition half, right? So it's 13 of those between centre backs in the first half and only one in the second half. So because Dundee, basically that was their approach for the first half against the wind. And then when they had the wind in their favour, it was basically just get the ball into the corners, turn the Celtic defence, and press really high and force throw-ins, corners, free kicks, or whatever, and then just launch the ball in the box. I mean, four of their chances were created off corners, but then Celtic created three chances off corners as well. To be fair, so they had a lot of moments. I think it wasn't sometimes talk about chances in terms of when we talk about a chance, we mean like it culminates in a shot at goal. I can't remember which data provider it was now that used to record dangerous moments. So no shot actually happened. It was just like a one of those oh no kind of
Yep.
moments where the ball's kind of bobbling about in the 6 yard box. Nobody actually has a shot at goal. It's just like it's just not. It's just
Yep.
a bit hairy. They had a few of those. I think you couldn't log it as a shot, etc. Yeah, I think it's still worth doing that. To be honest with you, I think we should have hairy moments as a data point. But I mean that none of that, and then of course when they did attack, they attacked the left side. They placed Boateng on the right, who's quite a tall guy. Surprise, surprise, and played a lot of aerial balls, especially down Celtic's left again as usual. So there was nothing particularly innovative about any of that. A lot of teams have done that before with Celtic. Go to man midfield, let the centre halves have the ball, attack the Celtic left hand side, you know, press them high when you've got the elements in your favour, force corners and throw-ins. It's textbook, really. I mean, it makes perfect sense. It makes absolute perfect sense. And actually, they had a lot of strong performances in the game. I think McCowan, their midfielder, has got to be
He's a
easily
decent player.
one of the best
Yeah.
midfielders out with the top two. Boateng had a strong game. The striker Bakayoko before he went off had a strong game. Silla, the sitting midfielder, he had a really strong game as well. And the left back Dodgson, he was their sort of main attacking weapon in terms of delivery. So I think they had a lot. I think they were excellent in terms of they stuck to their plan really well. I thought, and it was errors. Well, it was bad luck in terms of from their point of view in terms of Celtic's opening goal, and then a really bad error for the second goal, and that kind of killed them a little bit because from the 45th
Yep.
to the 60th minute they penned Celtic back. Um, and I think it was interesting, watching it on Celtic TV. So, Peter Grant doing the co-commentary, and he was getting really frustrated because Celtic just kept, Hart gives the ball to Scales, Scales gives the ball to Taylor, and then and then we start again. You know what I mean? It's like, or the ball doesn't get to Taylor. Or it's just like, why are we doing this? Why? I mean, clearly, they're playing to pin us in our own half. You know, and it wasn't really. I don't know. I don't know whether it was coincidental, but it wasn't really until Iwata and Ida came on that
Yep.
Celtic re got control. But again, that's easy causation correlation. Those two events correlated. I'm not sure. I think getting that second goal was probably more took the wind out of their sails, really. But having said that, one of the things which I noticed, and this is one of the interesting aspects of packing, in terms of it, a lot of packing data can become a little bit. It can become quite predictable. What I mean by that is, you pass the ball down the right hand side. If you pass it from centre back to winger, you've probably taken out the left Celtic's right winger and the left, the right and right midfielder, etc. Left winger, right, left midfielder, etc. So you've packed those two players. So right, what one thing I noticed in that second half was it became really random who was getting packed, and what that sounds a bit abstract, but that's what was physically happening. What does that mean? It means that we were structurally all over the place, and the midfield is particularly were all over the place. And what the thing that Iwata changed when he came on is he gave the midfield structure. It was a
Yep.
simple thing, but he gave it a basic structure. He sat in his little, the center circle kind of thing, and played pretty much the width of the center circle, and sat in that midfield, and sat and played as a proper pivot, and he just gave the team structure, and then O'Reilly and Hatate could wander, because Hatate wanders anyway to a
Yep.
huge extent. McGregor just doesn't seem on it in terms of his physical capabilities to get around the pitch, and obviously O'Reilly's trying to get in touch with Kyogo when he can as well, and it became very open in that second half. So I think two things: the goal, it just bad luck for them, bad mistake. Forrest punched them brilliantly, and that kind of deflated them. But then Iwata I think, just gave that structure. I think that made a huge difference to the team.
Yeah, that to me was, this is the perpetual concern I have and have had is that, the fact that their midfield did have a very good game. Um,
Yeah, they all
you
did.
know,
Yeah,
yeah, a significant aspect to that is just the physicality to me. I mean, they have pretty good athletes in there, and because they were man marking like that, and just letting center backs have the ball. I worry on the old recipe basis as we look ahead to our friends at Kilmarnock, for example. We know that's a similar prescription that we're going to get, or very likely to get out of a McKenna side. If this is the iteration of McGregor that we're dealing with, and it may very well be,
mm.
understandably, Achilles are that's a serious injury. And you would expect, given his character and the importance and all that stuff, that he may be playing through pain, or not 100% for sure. And as much as we uh, love O'Reilly, speed and transition is not his strength. And even against a team the level of Dundee, you know, uh, um, Hatate's going to get swatted like a fly at times, and he did. I mean, it just when you get into more chaotic circumstances against bigger, more physical opposition that are at least decent, that creates these issues. So yeah, that was the more concerning part for me that might be projectable forward, was that I thought the midfield was really concerning. Um,
In the second half,
rel
I would say.
Yeah,
Yeah,
relative to that mix, and again, that's that issue of fatiguing, and it's all on a dial. Um, so yeah, it's that's something that could linger as we go forward. I mean, I Hart's midfield isn't one that I'm terribly concerned about, even though Beningame is a decent athlete, but he's not very good on the ball.
I think he went
So
off after about 10 minutes or something at the weekend. I don't know
oh,
how
did
bad
he?
that
I didn't
injury
see
is,
that.
but yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah, as we
I
look
don't know.
ahead.
I mean, maybe someone can in the comments can let us know if that's a bad injury. You don't wish him. I like Bellingham. I think he's a really good player, but it'd be quite
Yep.
handy if he wasn't getting playing on Saturday weekend. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So that was probably the takeaway from the game that would be more concerning for me. Um, you know, there are positives too. I mean, again, let's segue to some of the positives. I mean, obviously the star was was James Forrest. Something that delights me. As I mentioned to you before we went live here. I mean, I've been perpetually um, annoyed with I think the kind of some of the prevailing narratives on him for years now. Um, just unfortunate rash of injuries early in his career, and then obviously from 2020 on, also having suffered some of those. But he just showed that level of and echoing something that Rogers has clearly said, is just that level of quality. I always go back. I mean, I've said it before, but I go back to the Champions League game against Bayern Munich, and I think it was in the 17-18 campaign where he was, I would argue the best player on the pitch in that game. I mean, he just, you know, performed at a level in multiple facets of the game, not just in attacking, but in controlling possession. Even his pressing was decent, his defending, his work rate, all of those things. Um, so I'm just delighted to see that he's had this resurgence, and I think it's interesting to hear some wavering on the part of the manager as far as maybe some of the decision making. And that's, as outsiders, we can't know what any fitness issues he might be carrying throughout the season and training, that kind of thing. That sounds like that may not have been that big of a part of the calculation here, which is all fascinating because, again, you know, I don't think a 32-year-old winger in um, his state is the solution at the Champions League level for Celtic. But that was done pretty early in the season. That issue was, largely a wash, I would say, in October for the most part. Um, and given the dire nature of the wing play that we've had, I mean, it really is interesting that he has not featured more prominently, even on a substitution basis, even on making a squad basis. I mean,
Mm.
um, so yeah, I'm thrilled. I hope that he continues to um, feature in some capacity because he's showing that he's still got that quality, which you can't teach that level of talent blending with IQ experience. I mean, it's a formidable mix at his age. And Yeah, so long may it continue at least for the next few games.
Yeah, I mean, again, can I only echo that? I mean, Forrest, I think, is criminally really undervalued by a lot of the Celtic support and has been for years, as often happens with players that are just around all the time, and are kind of taken for granted a little bit, as he has been. We maybe we contributed a little bit to that. I mean, last season, I think he was the fifth choice winger. I mean, this is just as far as Postecoglou was concerned, Forrest was the fifth choice winger, and we're now in a position where a year older than he even was last year. He's now potentially mission critical as far as the running is concerned. Why is that? Well, again, the well documented and quality. You use the word quality. I mean, what does that mean? It's a very loose, abstract term, really, but it's decision making and its execution of decisions, and the other wingers have just proven to be so erratic. So you know, up and down really as regards those things. Now, it's the very much the modern trend. It's the modern trend to have, especially wide forwards that put a lot of what I call put a lot of risk in the game. So they'll try difficult things, and that means that their pass completion rates will be low, and a lot of balls will fly over the bar. I mean, used to talk about Jota in this regard, but for every couple of two or three crosses that flew over the bar with Jota, you got one right on the money, right? And you maybe got a couple of those in a game, right? But with Kuhn and Palmer and Yang, we just don't see that as consistently so far. I think with Kuhn, you've just got that sheer raw pace, which you can't legislate for. And that's always going to be an attractive proposition for a manager to have that pace in the team. Um, and but with Forrest, he's careful on the ball relative to the other wingers that we've got, meaning that sometimes he'll just do the dull thing. He'll turn back and he'll knock it back and he'll go again. But he tends to make good decisions. He won't throw the ball in the box unless he thinks there's a purpose behind it. He won't just do it for its own sake. And if you're going to have a striker like Kyogo, you need to be quite precise about your actions. You need to be quite clinical because he's just a little guy. He's not going to bash somebody out of the way. So, you know, here we are. Our fifth choice winger is resurgent, but great for him. And I think it's a great story if he can continue. Whatever happens now, he's had that Dundee game, which two goals in a really sticky, horrible game that Celtic had to win. We'll always have that, but I think there's a few more stories to tell for James Forrest this season, because you can't beat intelligence. You can't beat intelligence and experience and making the right decision in big games, which is what he can do. And especially relative to the other players. Now, the thought of if Maeda's back in play, and he seems to be on the training paddock at least, if he comes into play, and you've got maybe Maeda and Kuhn, you've got this extremely quick front line again, this sort of pressing machine as well. Because Kuhn's actually one of the things, I think he won more tackles nearly than anyone else at the weekend. I mean, he doesn't. Again, he didn't stand out. Palmer's actually not too bad that way. He just doesn't have Kuhn's raw pace, but Kuhn's not too bad in terms of his defense, some of his defensive actions. If you've got that raw pace, but then you've got Forrest coming on 20, 30 minutes to go to sort of start to control the game more. Because what we've seen with Celtic in the last few weeks is perhaps losing a bit of control in the latter stages of games. And again, it almost happened at Dundee. I mean, Adamida gave away an absolutely brainless free kick in the last couple of minutes that allowed another long high box ball to be launched into the box, which the guy got the end off and only just headed past the post. So we need a bit of intelligence and a bit of nous to see out these games. And Forrest, whatever else he may be lacking in terms of his explosive speed that he used to have, he's definitely got that.
Well, and I think the other thing he has is he can obviously he can play both wings, but he can also go. He's bilateral, like he can go both directions, and I think that's the ability to incorporate that into the attack. I mean, I'm starting to get concerned that Kuhn's a little one sided in his. He tends to he seems to have an aversion to going to his right. So again, if I'm an opposition team that does some video scouting, you're going to pick that up right away. I mean, why would you not hedge him and
Mm,
sit on his basically force him to his right? And I'm starting to see that a little bit.
mm,
Some teams are doing that, including I thought Dundee a little bit. And that's with Force. I mean, you can't do that with him. He can take you either direction. And yes, maybe he's a fraction of or even a half step a little bit slower than he used to be, but he's not that much slower. Again,
mm,
it's not. Get back to me in 18 months, 2 years. That's when he'll fall off a cliff, as
mm,
most players do in that kind of age 33, 34, 35. And the other part to me, I mean, again, you hear all of these kind of narratives that are almost always perpetuated. So it's always, most teams and managers aren't going to slaughter their own players for obvious reasons. Um, but he does seem to be a first class professional, and I mean he's leaner now than I can ever remember him. Even
mm,
under Ange, when a lot of players seemed like they lost weight and got leaner, and for obvious reasons. I mean, to me, he looks you know as fit as he did at any time, and
right.
yeah. So um, I think his functional athleticism seems to be holding up pretty well.
Mm,
Um, so yeah, I think it'll be interesting to me. I mean, you know, the miraculous recovery of Maeda aside, I'm always nervous when I hear, even the
yeah.
manager mentioning tendon. I mean
Yeah. Yeah.
that and with the rash of soft tissue injuries that we've had, particularly hamstring problems, um, I'd be really concerned about just unleashing him and expecting to get, 90 minutes or 90 plus minutes out of him. So I think it'll be really interesting to see um, how the wingers are utilized, and whether um, Forrest does ascend to a starting position or if he's kind of slotted in as that super sub change up guy. To your point, um, yeah, because I agree. Like with some of these issues that we're seeing in midfield now. I mean, this issue of control and having him in there. I fear of that toxic combination potential of Maeda on the left with Hatate and Scales, and with a man marking athletic midfield opponent. That to me gives me some concern. Um, so yeah, it'll be a point to be, a big question for the manager to answer here as we head into the run-in.
Yeah, well, it's again, we need to be careful because everyone's rejoicing on Maeda's back, but remember, look how many games it's taken Hatate to get up to speed. How many? Look how McGregor's struggling. You know, people were making kind of sweeping statements about him. You've got to realize he's come back from, like you say, an Achilles injury, which is really painful and difficult. And he's trying to be the man, and run the midfield for Celtic, and he looks hampered. And you've got to be realistic about this. I mean, Hatate got through 90 minutes at the weekend, which is great. And actually, to your point, he did get brushed off the ball very easily by their more powerful midfield. Dundee had a more powerful midfield, but he was also the one midfielder that got on the ball
Yep.
quite a lot, and he was the one who was providing more insightful passes than the other two. I think O'Reilly tends to be more effective nearer the box. The Tatis, as we said before, is probably more effective a little bit deeper. And I thought it was a real mixed bag with him with Hatate. There was a lot of good stuff, a lot of ball progression, but there was a lot of turnovers. There was a lot of giving the ball away. There was a lot of getting bumped off the ball too easily. Um, and but the point comes back to we chuck Maeda back in. Um, we can't expect miracles. These players have had injuries. It does take time, and I would rather we'd played Iwata in a couple of those games and given McGregor an extra couple of weeks, and brought McGregor on maybe for 20 minutes at the end, just to kind of get his legs moving again. In if like against St Mirren away, for example, at home, sorry, when he's 3-0 up, bring him on and let him just control the ball for the last 20 minutes, that sort of thing, rather than put him on to win the game from the start. So we know that's worrying. It's worrying. We've talked about this many times about not looking after players and expecting too much from players that have been injured. And that if we're good, if now Maeda's the new savior, we need to be really really careful and manage these players a lot better. Forrest hitting some form is a great bonus. It means that with Palmer back, we've got options. We don't have to throw Maeda in, and certainly at home to Hearts is it really necessary? To throw him in from the start, for example. So I hope, I think it's a forlorn. I think we're, as a club, kind of given up, like you have, I think, in terms of expecting football clubs, not just Celtic, football clubs in general, to look after players properly. But these things can cost you games at the end of the day. I mean, that Aberdeen semi-final, was it really the best thing to play McGregor from the start? What did he, would Celtic have had more control with Iwata?
Yeah, that's it's and I'm not surprised because, again, just from what I know about Achilles injuries, I mean, those are long-term issues. That's not something um, you typically get over in a matter of weeks or even a couple of months. I mean, that you can recover to the point of being able to be functional. um, but, and again, obviously not knowing whether it was just a strain or a slight tear or that kind of. If obviously it wasn't a total tear, else he wouldn't have been walking. He'd have been having to have surgery and be out for a year or something. Um, but Achilles are major, injuries. And the fact that he was out for the duration, and there was talk he was going to be out for the rest of the season. I, so it does present a real quandary because, that does, if he does not have the physical ability to, um, progress the ball as we're used to him doing, particularly when you're talking about, opponents man marking in midfield, that puts a huge burden on, Hatate to provide that, which again, we know his risk profile is one of that can be brilliant or it can be, not less so. And then it really does. I mean, that's why this, I say tongue in cheek. Doherty was, generally the narrative on him has been pretty positive this season. I've largely followed along with that and agreed. And I thought their game plan was pretty smart That's why the throw-in thing was driving me berserk. um, but less so Hearts, but you start seeing some of the other managers. I mean, St. Mirren, he's been a pretty smart manager. Um, and they've played a lot of man marking at times against teams and certainly us. So, yeah, I just don't know because the risk reward on McGregor, if you're not getting that ball progression, you're generally not going to get a lot of creative passing out of him. And unless he's going to change his mental makeup to sit like a Wada, he's going to get out of position. And if he doesn't have that athleticism that he normally has in order to recover, and man, it's fine margins, as we say. I mean, it's just that 2, 3, 4, 5% that someone may not have because of carrying an Achilles injury and still recovering from it. I mean, to me, it's really concerning.
Agreed. I mean, just checking there. I think there was six pack passes, but they weren't particularly impactful. So it kind of puts the strain on the centre backs for a start, because normally he would pick the ball up from them, and then it puts some of the burden on O'Reilly and Hatate to be creating and covering. And as I say, it kind of fell apart a little bit in that early part of that second half as McGregor kind of he was fatigued. So against a more sort of muscular, organized team like Hearts, I think there's some merit in Iwata starting, and then just to to allow Hatate and O'Reilly that bit more freedom and security to do their thing, and to give to take the burden off the centre backs to be the ones that are coming out and pressing the ball. But at home at Celtic Park, the big stadium, the wind's usually less of a feature. I think the weather's kind of turned a little bit here. It's a bit more pleasant now. Hopefully that in those next two home games, we'll be able to play our football, and it should be a little bit easier, less stressful in that regard. Um, but yeah, that to me is a big. I'm with you really. It's a real worry. It's a real worry because I mean he just looks hampered. I can't put it any other way. There was like zero at final third. We got from McGregor, almost nothing in the final third. We got a number of turnovers, and we got very little in terms of forward passing. So that
Well,
utility is much diminished.
yeah, I mean, as we always say, single game stats like XG or even OBV, that kind of thing, are to be taken with a grain of salt. And there's always issues with models and error bars and all that type of stuff. But again, just contextually, it's about signal and noise. So this speaks to the OBV profile for the game completely fits with your read of the game, and the eye test, which was they left our center backs have the ball, obviously, right? Well, for pass and dribble and carry OBV, which are kind of proxies for ball progression for defensive midfielders and center backs in particular, Scales was at 0.34 positive. Um,
It's high, yeah.
Carter Vickers, yep, that's really high. Carter Vickers was 0.27. McGregor was minus 0.03. I'm combining the two between pass and
Yeah,
and
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
dribble and carry. So that just gives you an idea of not only volume, but you know, and again, just for a reminder for people that what OBV does is it subtracts off your score, so to speak, in if you turn the ball over, for example. So it kind of nets out your total contribution in good and bad. So McGregor's pass OB was actually negative for the game, which for him
Yeah.
is like,
I can believe that.
you know,
I mean,
yeah,
OBV for those. There's a good stats bomb have made public, an explainer video, which is excellent, and you should watch it. And there's also an explainer version video for packing, and the reason I'm mentioning packing is because OBV is almost, if I dumb it right down, OBV is almost like packing but with XG as the as the
yes,
as the number. It,
as
it, it
the
is
yeah.
almost that. Yeah, it is almost that.
XG is the currency. Yeah, for OBV,
XG is the
everything is
currency.
is
With
yep,
with packing, it's a made up currency. It's like
yep.
crypto. It doesn't really exist,
Right.
right? With OBV, it's actually XG, but it relates to actions on the field and to what extent you add to or subtract from, depending on whether your team's kind of XG either plus or minus. Was packing is a literal score, but it can be minus if you turn the ball over and you actually take your own players out of the game. But the two things I'd love to do a proper correlation between them. I suspect there's quite a strong correlation
Oh
between them
yeah,
because they're based on similar principles.
same concepts. Yep,
Mm,
100%. I think yeah, my sense is just in looking at what you've done and generally um, some broader pieces on packing, and then with the particularly the pass OBV for StatsBomb that specifically. Um, yeah, I think you would find particularly in certain um, positions, as we say, it's different for a number 10 or winger because they're much higher risk profile in their passing. So packing isn't as big of an issue there. It's you know chance creation and that
And
type
it's
of
all
thing. But
relative to that population as well. I mean, as I say,
exactly,
the reason I do it is not so I can compare James Forrest to, I don't know, Rabbi Matondo necessarily. It's because I can compare James Forrest to Luis Palma, right? Because
yep,
and that's a currency that Celtic fans would understand. It's internal benchmarking of Celtic players essentially. That was always what I was trying to do with Celtic that number. Sorry, diverting down a bit of a rabbit hole, but
yeah, no.
these are interesting concepts.
Well, and that's just to revert back to the kind of put a pin in the James Forrest conversation. So one of the things I've tried to do is through an attribution model conceptually is to think about, okay, well this is how the team's performing. What are the factors that drive that, and then like what's the share of each player's contribution
Hmm,
relative to the team.
hmm,
And if you look at things through that prism, um, James Forrest, I would argue, last kind of fully productive season, and you know, and obviously the 1920 season couldn't be full because of the pandemic, but his 18-19 season, if you kind of normalize things for overall team performance, because that was a relatively low performing Celtic team in the kind of the context of the last 6 or 7 seasons. Um, uh, he basically measures right up with Jota under Ange. If you kind of normalize, I mean, there was that team created about 15% less chances, and the quality of chances were also lower. So it was just not as a well functioning attacking side. And there was a lot of reasons for that we won't. I think most of our our listeners and viewers will be well aware of, given the, the aspects of what was going on that season. Um, so again, that just speaks to the level with which of the quality and the performance levels that Forrest was
hmm.
at. So even a 5 or 10% diminished Forrest, or and again, this is the issue. He's not been flogged for 50 games this season, so he's a
Or
fresh.
any of the last two seasons.
Well, right, yeah. So he's a,
Hmm,
he's a fresh 32. Whereas, some of our other players are carrying injuries, as we've talked about, or have played 4,000 minutes or 3,000 minutes, whatever it is for the season. Guy like O'Reilly, I mean, the amount of minutes that he's put into his legs this season, I mean, there's just no way he can be as fresh um, relative to somebody like Forrest. So, yeah, I think the level of performance that we could get out of him relative to the peer group, actually, I'm really bullish on him, even above and beyond the obvious recency bias of what he's done in
hmm.
the last couple of games. Um, so, anything else? We'll put a pin in the Dundee game as we look forward. Um, so, how are you feeling about the title race then? Where is Alan Morrison's head at as we
Well,
look towards the last few games?
I'm optimistic so long as we don't get beaten. That's bit that's beaten with an O, not an E. Um, it's like a one-man wrecking ball that could derail the season. Um, yeah. So listen, what three? I mean, if you take goal difference, you're logically 4 points ahead almost. We need to lose the derby and then draw another game. Now that isn't actually beyond the realms. Okay, I mean we're not in a place as a team where we're so coherent and so functionally. on point at the moment, or have been at any point during the season, frankly, where that is an unreasonable assertion that Celtic could lose a game and draw a game. Um, but having said that, having watched both games on Sunday, um, I think they're in a worse state than we are. Frankly, I thought that performance against St Mirren was abysmal from the point of view of, I mean, with Celtic, you could see them trying to control the game. You could see them trying to really
Yep.
impose themselves on the game. Then I think we got, I say, undone a little bit by the elements and a little bit by smart play by Dundee, and then mainly by a tiring midfield. Really was what done for that, and that was for a 15-minute period, and then Forrest scored the second, and then pretty much controlled the last, the last parts of the game. Whereas they were absolutely terrible from almost the first minute to the last. And you know, so in terms of relative strengths, and maybe we can, uh, you know, maybe tee you up a little bit for a conversation on some of the expected points models that are knocking about, which now seem to be in Celtic's favour. I mean, just listen. You need to be careful with these things. They might give you some emotional security or insecurity depending on which way they're going. They've mainly been going against Celtic actually all season. Um, I would do something very unscientific and add in my expected points from honest mistakes model on top of the. In which case, you could make a case that the league should be pretty much done now. If you factored in honest mistakes and factored in that Celtic are three between 3 and 4 expected points based on XG models ahead, you're probably looking at a sort of 6, 7 point margin at this stage, which you think would be very difficult. But anyway, here we are in reality. So listen, I'm feeling good. We've got 3 games out of 4 at home. I mean, that's got to be in itself. That's got to be an advantage. Um, if we win, I think Hearts obviously need to win that game, and then if we get a draw against, even a draw at home in the derby, we just got to avoid defeat at Kilmarnock, which that is the one that's looming. But to win the next 2 games, and I don't see how we can lose it, frankly. Really.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I, when you get in, you mentioned expected points. When you get into this kind of situation, I'm going to go completely off brand here. Um, is when the pressure cooker goes up, and when you get into a relatively small number of games, that's when the qualitative stuff, in my mind, becomes uh, significantly more important to the point where it could become decisive. And
That's why you make decisions
uh,
like playing McGregor when he's not fit because of that, right?
well, you might make that mistake, right? So that's the hard part, is how do you dial in between
Mm,
things like leadership and character versus the guys running around at 80%, and
mm.
what's more important. So I but when I look at the remaining fixture, so it's just you just look at the table. I mean, there's basically two teams that have nothing to play for,
Yeah.
just generally,
Kilmarnock and Hearts. Yeah, yeah,
conceptually.
yeah, yeah.
Right. And which of those teams, if you're going to think up something, that are they going to be more incentivized to play versus us or Rangers?
Oh,
And
oh,
again,
oh, oh, oh.
well, no, it's just this is
Yeah.
again just from a cultural perspective. From this
Mm,
is not like a match
mm.
fixing ridiculous. It's just the human
No, no.
element,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So if you're going to get up for
But to
one
be
of your
fair, the
last,
man, the managers aren't the players. As much as Stephen Naismith would love it for Celtic not to win the league, his players are their
they could
own
give two
agents, right?
craps.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. They may not, right?
Hmm.
So that's it's on the margins, right? All the stuff's on the margins. So some of the players might already be at the beach mentally and that would be human for that to be the case because they don't really have anything to play for. But on the margin, if they're going to get up for one of the remaining opponents, it's going to be us probably because of their managers versus and we do play Kilmarnock at home, at their home, which again on the margin you might think would have them more motivated. Um, and the two teams that really have anything to play with for other than us and Rangers, we just played one of them, um, and Rangers did too. So there's one left for each against that team. And again, how do you match those things up? And I don't, St. Maron's not going to be an easy game, and the way we're because of where we're at physically with the pressure cooker. And it'll be interesting. Like I all season long have actually preferred us away, and we've talked about that in the past, just because of relative tactics. Um, and I would like to think that our support would be a positive, but it's only human in a title race as the pressure cooker gets turned up that you go a goal behind, or you know what I mean. Like there's that fine line between cheering on and trying to be a force for good to, you know, oh shit, what's going on here? This is crap, and that mood turns, and um, it could become a difficult thing for players to kind of operate within. So,
So we
when
do
I look at all,
we
go
do
on.
sorry, we just very quickly, we do
Yep.
generate half an XG per game more at home than away. It's 2.88 at home and it's 2.3 something away. So I just throw that in.
Yep. Yep. Um, So, some of that's because I think, this goes back to the conversation we had around the turn of the year, that I think because we've been perceived to be relatively weaker, that teams haven't always come to Celtic Park and bunkered. Like there's been quite a number of them that actually haven't done that. Um, but so when I take those kind of qualitative aspects, I actually think they skew against us on the margin in the remaining games, and you know, um,
And sorry,
honest
just
mistakes. Probably.
to,
Yep.
to
Go ahead.
complete that. Sorry, just to
Yep.
complete that. Sorry to interrupt. So we average 0.69 XG against at home, but at 1.01 away. So it's quite a significant difference there, really. And I'm not dismissing what you're saying. All that, I think the crowd recognise, I would say, the significance of the season in terms of what's at stake with the expanded Champions League. I think they recognise the environment in terms of Rodgers has really not been dealt a great hand, and the club have probably not supported, and not just the club in the widest sense in terms of
Yep.
the recruitment efforts and so forth have not been there, the injuries and so forth. And I think all of that, and the whole honest mistakes. I'd be astonished if the crowd were to turn in any way in these key games. To your point.
I hope so. I think so. But again, you're thinking about what could happen, right?
Mhm,
So
mhm.
yeah, and that's not the big part of what I think the bigger issue is the relative potential issue is the relative effort of the other remaining opponents, um, honest mistakes, the risk, or even just variance of bad calls that could break, or not even bad calls, just bad luck. I mean, we're at the point now where one or two mistimed tackles in the box that result in a penalty could literally be how we drop that 2 points that creates the issue where the derby is like league determining, that kind of thing. So even if it's not due to a bad call, if it's just Carter Vickers has a brain fart. I mean, these things happen. Like when you're down to four games, I mean, these things can happen. Um, so on the margin, I kind of tilt those things disfavorably, but I agree. Like the nuts and bolts of what's going on, I think we're materially not only are we advantaged because of the 3 points and the 5 goals, but because as I watched most, if not all, of their games, and I think they're really struggling, and I don't understand what Clement's trying to do. That's the other part, like some of his selections and how he's utilizing some of the players. I mean, it's just and they've had some significant injuries too. I mean, them losing Seam is a big deal. Like I don't know if his
Is he
timeline.
hamstring again? Yeah,
Yeah,
he's
yeah, I
hamstring
think
again, I think, isn't he? Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So I think it was a tweak. So there's, I think there's some talk that they're hoping he'll be back. I would correlate him more like Maeda. It's
yeah.
the way that's kind of played
Yeah, but
out.
if
So
if
I
their
I
if
don't
their if
know.
their if their lineup is anything like what they put out against St Mirren with Sterling and Silva as the wide attackers and
Well,
Lundstrom
that
anchoring the
that's
midfield, I mean
so,
that's Balogun
you
and
know.
Suter and Barisic. I mean that's
Yeah,
yeah.
their go back to this issue of midfield. Their midfield's been
Mm,
pretty dreadful,
mm.
in my view, and Silva has been objectively bad. Like not
Yeah,
only
yeah.
Dessers gets a lot of the arrows, which I think is overstated. I don't think he's been anywhere near as bad as the narrative on him has been.
Mhm,
But Silva's
mhm.
been objectively bad. Like I have yet to see him. Now that's not to say he's not a talented guy. He's young. All these other. I mean, there's a theoretically a reason. I mean, he has to be somewhat quality to attract the fees and the pedigree that he comes from. So it's not that he can't come up with moments of magic. Again, we're talking about 4 games, so maybe he gets hot here. But so far, like he's been objectively terrible. Um,
It
and
would be such a shame if it is the case that they have to play him if he's fit. That would be so unfortunate, right?
but at wing too, like if you're if I was going to play him, it would be at the 10 spot.
Mm,
The
mm.
fact that they are using him out wide and then Cantwell at the 10. I mean, with lunch, I mean, I was crestfallen to
You,
hear that or
you
to
see,
read.
you see that when when they're really struggling to get any control in the game, and you got Lundstrom and Diomande right sat in front of the back four, and then you've got Cantwell coming dropping 60 yards to pick the ball up off the
Yeah,
centre backs. I'm thinking, how does a
it's crazy.
manager? How does he put up with that? I mean, some managers, like an Alex Ferguson, would you just have taken you just literally gone onto the pitch and dragged the twat
Wring
off
his neck.
by his fucking stupid hair. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
it's just criminal selfishness, really.
Well,
So
and so
long may it
that's
continue.
well, that's I was saying
Yeah,
I was joking. I was crestfallen to see. I mean, Barisic is what he is. But the news that he and Lundstrom apparently have signed contracts to go to Turkey, I was hoping they'd sign Lundstrom to an extension because to me he's the prototypical um, attribution of what a defensive midfielder should be at Celtic or Ranger, a dominant domestic team. Like he's just a complete donkey on the ball. Like, he's physical, he's reasonably athletic and can be pacey if he gets ahead, builds up ahead of steam. But he just clogs up their build. I mean, but he's undroppable. Like he keeps playing. So
Clement
I
loves him.
would get
He's great. Yeah,
well, right, right. So my nightmare scenario is if I woke up and saw them play Sterling and Diamande next to each other
yeah,
in
yeah,
that,
absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
and they could put somebody, whether it's Silva or Lauren, somebody is not Cantwell at the number 10, then I'd probably get more concerned. But
yeah, absolutely.
you know, um, and they've really struggled to create chances, and that continues to be the issue. And to me, it's largely an issue of their midfield, and they're not able to connect um, from the ball progression quickly up through the back line. Um, so yeah, so I generally I think that's the way Clement's taken things with them. Has me pretty confident, even if it was like if it was a even
Yeah.
up league, I'd be
I've just checked the
um,
odds, by the way. You probably understand this better than I do, but looking across a
yep,
range of odds across a range of providers, this is to win the title. So Celtic are generally in the sort of 9 to 2 on, 6 to 1 on, 5 to 1 on, 11 to 50 on. They're around the 7 to 2, 10 to 3 sort of
yep.
space. So that seems like a pretty
Yeah, and again
yeah, yeah, yeah.
with the number of games left in the lead and the derby at home, um, yeah, I mean we're as we mentioned a couple weeks ago, or even the show before that we're odds on now. Um, so yeah, I mean it's because he's always looking to try and like what would be the boogeyman behind the corner, and I think some of those qualitative things that I mentioned.
Mhm.
If I'm looking for something to be worried about, those would probably be it. Um, and you get down to any single game, derbies are derbies. I mean, it's who knows. You get, like I said, one mistimed tackle or one one or two bad calls or an injury. Those kind of things. I mean, we're getting so close now that just kind of random stuff could be problematic. But yeah, I'm probably jinxing everything now because I'm usually the one that's
Well,
trying to overcompensate. But
as we've said all season, I mean, I think Hearts have got a huge gap down to in third place. I think they're like solid. They're not going to. I don't think they've
yeah, it's like 11 points, I
mathematically
think. Yeah,
secured it, but yeah, they're pretty much there. But actually, as
yeah,
we've said all season, if you look at the underlying performance data, you could make a case for Kilmarnock being the third best team in the league. They probably shade it in terms of the underlying XG numbers. just in terms of the underlying, chances created, things like keeper saves, XG per shot, that kind of thing. Hearts are like they're overperforming to a small degree on their kind of goals scored, and they're massively underperforming in terms of they're conceding way less than what their XG is against them. So that's been pretty consistent all season. And that's not to say that they don't deserve to be up near the top of the league. I mean, they're on a great run. I think they've only lost to they lost the game to Ross County actually, which has become a real tricky away game. It seems, as well as of course actually getting taken apart at Ibrox, which is seems to be the cultural norm. But listen, it'll be a tricky game, like you say. Certain players and certainly their manager will be massively up for it in comparison to other teams that they play, but still, they're not the force that the league table suggests. As I say, I think Kilmarnock I still have a good shout for being on
That
by the data, the third best team in the league.
Yeah, and I've been saying this for weeks now, but that remains the single game that has me concerned the most. Not
Mm,
only because of to your point, I think they are functionally the third best team, and I want to use that, and I'll
yeah.
get back to why that is, um, in the league. But the fact that we have to go to their pitch, and um, I think their tactics, just inherently relative to their manager, is probably problematic on a relative basis. But I had done a deep dive on Shanklin just because he's had such an unusual season, and I was trying to
Mm,
benchmark some certain things, and I got some nice feedback from Hearts supporters at the time. This is going back maybe 6 weeks or something, maybe 2 months
right.
ago.
Okay.
Um, but
Okay.
but I'm thrilled to because I basically what I was saying is that his finishing's been unrealistically,
Mm,
unsustainably good this season. To his credit, I mean,
yeah.
he's been
Yeah.
brilliant
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
finishing. His decision
No, I
making
got, I got,
sucks,
I've
but
got, I've got him 21. Well, this is Opta data, to be fair. 21 league goals off of about just over 15 xG or something like that.
yeah,
Quite a
it's
few penalties, of
unsustainable.
course. Hmm.
Right, unsustainably high, but gloriously since March 11th, um, their 1-0 victory over Greenock Morton. Since then, he's had one goal
Right.
on a lot of shots because he shoots a lot. Um, so that's another thing. Like um, he was due to cool off anyway. I mean, it was just unsustainable. Even really
Mm,
great players cannot finish at that rate over any
mm,
significant. Like he was orders of magnitude better finishing than Messi over his career. You know what
mm,
I mean? Like it's just
mm,
not
mm,
going to happen. So it
mm,
was a question of when, not if, that he kind of mean reverts, even to a really good finisher. Like he's been a good finisher over his career. So it's that type. Like if you just normalize his season to being a really good finisher instead of like unsustainably insanely good, they're they probably finish fourth in the league behind Kilmarnock. I
yeah.
was getting to the the context of the conversation.
Yeah. Okay.
So this goes back, like particularly with him probably mean reverting, or the chances of him not finishing great in the next four games are inordinately high, um, above and beyond all the other factors that we've talked about. Um, that brings me back to Kilmarnock is the bogey the bogeyman other than the Derby. So well, we've rambled on for about an hour here, a little over an hour. So make up for a little lost time since we were out for the week. Any other last thoughts before we head into the Hearts game on the weekend?
No, I don't think so. No, I think we're good. Yeah. Listen, can't wait. Bring it on.
Yeah, I'm unfortunate. I'm going to be in the car during the game, so I'll
Yeah.
probably have my wife drive or ask her to drive, not have her. I mean, there's my Neanderthal
Yeah,
misogyny coming out.
that'd be a little bit outside of
A le- I
social
I didn't
boundaries.
say let her. I didn't say let her drive. That would have been the true
Yeah,
old school way of saying it.
yeah.
But
You're not ready
I w-
yet, dear. Another couple of weeks instruction. We get some more instruction into you, darling, and I think you'll be fine for the job.
yes, I'm
Now
going to
pipe down.
politely. We have a christening about 3.5 hours drive away, so I'll probably be in the car, and I will politely ask my wife if she will drive. Um, so I can monitor the game on my phone probably. But what we I think we'll be back next week, if not for a three-headed monster, the Three Amigos, the Three Stooges, whatever you want to characterize it as. I think Alan and I will definitely be back because Endo will hopefully be available to produce, even if he can't make the recording. As always, we appreciate those who listen or watch. If you can subscribe, like at YouTube, or leave a review on any of the podcasts apps, whether it's Spotify, Apple, iTunes, we appreciate it. And we will talk to you next week.